So there's a farmer, and well, he's got a mean wife. She's always at him, always yelling at him. And his only relief really is when he goes out and works and plows with this mule. And he's really, you know, he's really into doing his farming. And so every day he makes sure that as soon as he gets up and gets going, he's out there with that mule plowing away, planting crops. So one day he's out there and he's working hard in the sun plowing, and his wife comes along and she goes, here's your lunch. So he goes, okay, thank you, honey. He sits down on a stump and he's eating his lunch, and boy, she starts going right at him. She's yelling at him, you didn't do this, you didn't fix that. And so he's just eating his lunch and nodding and saying, yep, honey, okay, I'll get to it. And so out of nowhere, the mule just jumps out of the traces and kicks her right in the head, knocks her down. She's dead. The farmer's like, oh my God. So the few days later, there's a funeral, and all the locals are at the funeral, and so he's pretty sad. I mean, she wasn't good to him, but he's still shaken up, and so he's standing by the grave and he's crying, and so the woman, in the area, they're coming up to him first, and they're all giving him hugs, and they're talking to him, whispering in his ear, and he's nodding his head and saying, yep, yep. And then after a little while, the men are coming by, and they're shaking his hand, and, they're talking to him and talking quietly, and he keeps shaking his head, no, no. So several of them come by, and each one, no, no. So the funeral's over, and he's getting ready to leave, and the pastor comes up to him and he says, yeah, how you doing? You're doing all right? And he says, yeah, I'm holding up. So he says, I noticed the women were all coming up and talking to you, and you were shaking your head, yes. And he said, but he says that when the men came up, he said, you kept shaking your head, no. He said, what's going on? Like, what were they saying? And the farmer says, well, the women were all very nice. They all came up and they offered condolences and told me, they'd come by and bring food, and they talked about, how pretty my wife looked in the coffin at the wake, and he said they just said kind words. And so he says, well, what about the men with them? And he says, well, the men all wanted to rent my mule, and he says I had to say no.